Hi everyone, so today in this video we're going to start looking at some of the key quotations in Act 1 of Macbeth. Obviously we looked at some of the contextual information. You've got lots of information in detail in the front of your copies of the text. You've got lots of information at the back, more historical context as well, which we've looked through in previous videos. So today we're going to look at those quotations, and remember that in Macbeth you will always be given in the exam an extract from the text. Some, that might be an entire act or scene, it might be part of an act or scene, it might just be one character's speech. We see all kinds of different things, but please remember as you read in the play that you need to be thinking about how is a character presented in the beginning, middle and end of the play, and how do they kind of change or develop as the play continues as well. So be thinking, sometimes when we're annotating this, for instance, we'll have annotated it as if you're going to get this as an extract in the exam and you pick out two quotations to talk about. Sometimes what we'll get you to do is, learn some of these quotations. They're really, really useful. So we're going to start with Act 1, Scene 1. Page reference is on page 1, obviously, but there isn't a number at the top. You can see on the annotations and scrolling around this. I know some teachers will have got you to write absolutely loads. In theory, you could highlight every single word in Act 1 or every single word on every single page in Macbeth, and obviously some of the other structural techniques, but we're just going to look at one or two key ones from each bit. And the first one is fair is foul and foul is fair. You may remember from the Year 11 lesson we did a while ago that we looked at this as kind of a key line. Fair is foul and foul is fair, and the weather being kind of terrible weather, thunder and lightning in the start, where the witches kind of are introduced to the play, is used by Shakespeare as a kind of a metaphor for the entire play. This idea that things that appear fair, it's kind of defined here, things that appear fair are foul, people that appear fair are foul, people who appear to be good and kind are kind of foul, they're kind of bad and they have evil intentions. And this is a metaphor for Macbeth's behaviour, Lady Macbeth's behaviour throughout the play. And the witches obviously are kind of supernatural. We know witchcraft's a crime, and this idea that the audience would view them as kind of these evil characters. But here what they're saying, if we kind of remove our response to the witches as characters, what they're saying is actually quite prophetic and metaphorical for the rest of the play. People who appear to be good are bad. Remember, you've got the use of iambic pentameter and the stress on fair, foul, foul and fair here as well, to further emphasise this concept of kind of evil are often kind of intermixed. And so we've got Act 1, Scene 2, and this is where King Duncan hears news from Macbeth. Here's news from his captain, his soldiers, that Macbeth and Banquo have been brave in battle. They fought against the Norwegians. He rewards Macbeth. He doesn't give him the title of Thane of Cawdor in this scene, but he acknowledges that Macbeth should be kind of praised for what he's done. And these are some really good short quotations to remember. Brave Macbeth, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman, honour, doubly redoubled and overcharged. This all creates this sense of Macbeth as a brave, honourable, valiant, noble character at the start. He's honest, he fights for good king and country, like a good soldier, like a good servant, like a good member of the great chain of being. Chain of Glamis at the start of the play. So he should want to fight for king and country. He should want to do his best by Scotland. And remember what we've said, fair is foul and foul is fair. At the start, Macbeth is described as a fair character, but it's very interesting that Macbeth is not in this scene to see his kind of response to this. We've also got the idea of kind of disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, and it's quite interesting that the Thane of Cawdor, they're talking about the current Thane of Cawdor, who is a traitor, but the next Thane of Cawdor, who is Macbeth, is also a disloyal traitor as well. So even at the start of the play, is starting to foreshadow some of these elements of foul behaviour that will come to the fore later on. Act 1, Scene 3, obviously we've got the return of the witches. We've got some kind of bawdy humour from the witches there. And then we've got the scene where Macbeth and Banquo stumble across the witches on Act 1, Scene 3, and the witches reveal their prophecies to Macbeth and Banquo. We've got a repeat of Foul and Fair a Day scene, and this time it's by Macbeth, kind of echoing the witch's opening speech. And also it's interesting that Macbeth is so foul and fair a day. This is a fair day because he's won the battle, because he's going to be told he's going to be king and Thane of Cawdor. But it's foul because this is the first day of Macbeth's descent into evil. It's interesting that he is kind of echoing the witch's words here, perhaps showing that Macbeth is now starting to kind of maybe consider or entertain those possibilities of evil. This is the kind of the first day of the rest of Macbeth's life, really, and it's not a good one. Then you've got the repetition of all hail, hail, all hail, hail, all hail, hail, and whether we take the witches seriously or not, this idea that they pander to Macbeth's ego, and look at the kind of number of repetitions of the word hail across these two pages. This idea, if you hail somebody, kind of bowing down to Macbeth, and even if these witches are kind of from the supernatural, from fantasy, this has an impact on Macbeth because it panders to his ego. It kind of makes him think that he is going to be more than he actually is at this stage of the novel, and he can see from their kind of hailing to him, although he's amazed by it, and Banquo certainly kind of dismisses it, Macbeth starts to become enticed by the prospect of becoming more than he actually is. And obviously they tell Macbeth that he'll be Thane of Cawdor, then they tell him he'll be king, and they tell Banquo that he won't be king, but his children will be king. And it's their response to that news, really. They kind of, Banquo dismisses it, Macbeth kind of starts to, but then is enticed a little bit as well. And then we've got this idea of page 8, this idea of borrowed robes and clothing. It's mentioned, clothing's represented throughout the play. This idea that Macbeth's saying, the Thane of Cawdor's alive because he doesn't know that the current Thane of Cawdor has been executed for treason at this point in Act 1, Scene 3. Because Ross has just come and told him you're going to be Thane of Cawdor, and he says, why do you dress me in borrowed robes? This idea that this is a metaphor for the rest of the novel, because Macbeth lives in borrowed robes throughout the novel. When he becomes the king, for instance, he steals the kingship really through murder, through overleaping the great chain of being, and he becomes Thane of Cawdor. And this idea that borrowed robes, perhaps it's a borrowed title as well, and so clothing's used to represent that as well. And then we've got kind of in page on page 9 the response to the witches, because he's just been crowned Thane of Cawdor, so the first element of their prophecy has come true. So if you're Macbeth, you're kind of thinking, well, hold on, they said I was going to be Thane of Cawdor, and I am Thane of Cawdor, so something is clearly going on here. Banquo says, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray in deepest consequence. This idea that sometimes people will tell us things that aren't true, or they tell us things that kind of we think are true to kind of betray us and to kind of make us go mad. Sometimes we see things that aren't there. We do this in kind of life now. Sometimes we get tempted and led astray by things that tell us something's going to happen, and actually that doesn't necessarily mean that they're true. And Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 3, he has kind of a side here, so kind of a short speech where he's to the audience, where he kind of reveals his state. He kind of reveals supernatural soliciting, this idea that the witches cannot be good, but maybe it cannot be ill, and he starts to think about the kind of the possibilities of what's going to happen, the horrible imaginings, this idea of the instruments of darkness. Banquo kind of mentions here, evil things are starting to kind of happen in Macbeth. The witches are perhaps to play for this, and this kind of goes against the use of nature, against the great chain of being, against kind of the heavenly order, God's kind of divine right of kings. The king has power, and Macbeth's starting to think, well, I don't know, if I'm going to be king, this is starting to hint at kind of something evil that I might need to do. And Banquo notices that Macbeth's rapt by this speech. He's kind of intrigued by this speech. He's enticed by the possibility of evil, and he's starting to consider this. Macbeth's basically saying, does he do everything to become king here, or does he forget what he's been told? Whereas Banquo, that is foil for Macbeth, kind of says, look, it's just nonsense. It's just an evil kind of disposition. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean it's going to come true there. And then kind of Banquo, like our strange garments, Banquo's starting to reference the clothing imagery again, that perhaps something's not quite right here. So Act 1, Scene 4 is where Macbeth and Banquo and Duncan all get together. They have this kind of celebration, and it's revealed in Act 1, Scene 4 that Malcolm is going to be the king's heir, and as a modern audience, we probably wouldn't ascribe too much to that really, because that's what would happen. If something happens, the Queen, Prince Charles would inherit the throne, and then William would inherit the throne, and then William's children. This is kind of, if you like, the great chain of being, command being kind of passed down rightly. So this is the bottom of page 12. and this isn't a key quote particularly, it's just this idea that, what's going on should have gone on. If you remember last time when we looked at the historical context, it mentions there are different ways of kind of passing on the succession here as well, this idea of tanistry, and this idea that through the mother. So Macbeth perhaps does have a legitimate claim to the throne here, but the idea that Macbeth mentions he's loyal, and then on page 13, after this decision's made, he's got to fall down or else overleap. He's got to overleap the chain of being. He's got to either kill Duncan and Malcolm. He doesn't, but he won't become king. And he starts to hide his black and deep desires. This idea that Macbeth is now thinking about murder. He's now thinking about these black and deep desires, the level of evil that he needs to use as a character to become who he needs to be. And this is kind of Act 1, Scene 4. And then Lady Macbeth in Act 1, Scene 5 gets a letter from Macbeth telling her about deeds. And there's quite a lot here. These two speeches would be great extracts for your exam. So we've got Scene 5 here. We'll look at Lady Macbeth's kind of initial soliloquy, which is kind of a speech to the audience where she fears Macbeth's nature, too full of the milk of human kindness. He's too innocent, art not without ambition. He's got the skill to lead, the ambition to do it. And she wants to pour spirits in her ear and chastise with the valour of his tongue. Basically, pour her evil spirits. This is Lady Macbeth's kind of starting to be a manipulative character. Shakespeare presents her as manipulative, but she's manipulative in many ways. It's important you know the ways. First of all, she insults Macbeth's masculinity throughout the play. She's also is going to seduce him. She's going to kind of put her spirits in his ear, but also punish him, chastise with the valour of his tongue. She's a brilliant character in terms of the way that she's able to manipulate Macbeth to do what she wants to do by doing the exact thing at the right time. And then there's a speech in Scene 5. There's lots of key quotations for Lady Macbeth here. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are absolutely key characters that you need to know in Macbeth, and their kind of ascent and descent into power is really worthwhile looking at once we kind of finish the play as a whole. But here you've got the unsex me here, this idea of kind of removing her stereotypical gender roles as a woman. Fill her full of direst cruelty, superlative direst. She's like the queen of evil. Stop up the access and passage to remorse. She doesn't want to feel sorrow. Take my milk for gall. Childbirth is considered a gift from God, and she wants to take the things that would nourish a child and feed that child poison, produced by our gallbladder. Pour the dun smoke of hell. She wants to hide her intention. Macbeth, who wants to hide the black and deep desires, and she doesn't want heaven to come kind of through that. She doesn't want to feel any sense of kind of God stopping her. And this speech is quite troubling to an audience, really. It hints at something a lot darker in Lady Macbeth's character, and a lot more evil and malicious that kind of progresses as the play develops. This idea, she's almost devil worshipping. She's almost selling her soul. She's contradicting or subverting stereotypical gender roles in this scene. It's one thing to want your husband to be ambitious. It's another thing to kind of worship the devil for, kind of power to do that as well. And, she kind of says to Macbeth arrives in Act 1, Scene 5, back at their castle. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Basically, appear to be innocent to Duncan. Appear to be something of beauty and symbolic of spring and innocence, the flower, but be a serpent. Have a lethal bite. Be ready to kill. And this idea of the biblical allusion of the snake in the Garden of Eden giving the apple to Eve. Obviously, is a kind of form of temptation. Lady Macbeth tempts Macbeth like a serpent here to kill Duncan, and obviously, when they kill Duncan, they then claim the power as their own in the way that Adam and Eve, when they eat the apple from the tree of knowledge, they gain all of God's knowledge and power as well. You've got a lovely euphemism here. Duncan must be provided for. It's kind of like a kind of a mafia gangland hit really here. Look after him. Obviously, that euphemism for murder. We'll speak further. Little structural features here, like Lady Macbeth interrupts Macbeth, showing her power over him there, and she kind of makes the plan as well at the end of Act 1, Scene 5. Finally, we've got Act 1, Scene 6. Finally, we've got two more scenes to go. So Act 1, Scene 6. There's a nice little bit here where Duncan and Banquo, who are both murdered very soon in the play, talk about the pleasant seat, the air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself. Not really a lot to get out of here, but this idea that both characters die, and they view kind of Scotland here, the air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself. Summer, the martlet, which is a summer bird. Heaven's breath. They're describing the scene around Macbeth's castle as beauty. And is this just the beauty of Scotland? But bear in mind that there's this element of naivety, because both of them die at Macbeth's hand very shortly in the kind of play here. So this kind of smell of the beauty of Macbeth's castle, it's lovely around here, and then they're both killed, shows their naivety. And this is kind of Duncan's hamartia, his naivety. He rewards power to the wrong people, he puts his faith in the wrong people. So it's quite a nice little scene there before they're both killed. And then Lady Macbeth introduces Duncan to the castle. She appears to be innocent in front of Duncan. Is this hyperbole to kind of distract him? Duncan says, we love Macbeth highly, which is harsher, leading to his death. So we've got the scene where Duncan's introduced to the party. And then at scene 7, you've got quite a few things that will make good extracts. You've got Macbeth's soliloquy, where he's worried about murdering Duncan. He's worried for 2 reasons. First of all, that he's his kinsman. He should be loyal to Duncan. He should be strong against the deed, and his host, he's loyal to Duncan, so he shouldn't want to kill him. And then he's a host, this idea that Duncan is in his castle, so he should be protecting Duncan rather than murdering. And then he goes on to kind of talk about how Duncan's like angels, pity like a naked newborn babe, heaven's cherubim. Basically, Duncan is an innocent character, entirely innocent compared to Macbeth. So Duncan will go straight to heaven, whereas Macbeth will go to hell. But then he seems resolute. I have no spur to prick the sides of my neck. There's nothing to stop me, only vaulting ambition. He's going to kind of jump over the great chain of being to get where he needs to get by the end of this speech in Act 1, Scene 7. So he seems to have convinced himself here. And then Lady Macbeth entered, and then he seems to change his mind again, determined we'll proceed no further in this business. A declarative sentence there showing Macbeth's kind of resolution, determination, standing up to her. And then Lady Macbeth, Shakespeare uses her as one of the kind of the most manipulative characters in literature. First of all, series of interrogatives, questions, question. It's a kind of it's almost like Lady Macbeth can't believe what she's saying here. Was the hope drunk wherein you yourself this morning? Had it slept since? Are you afraid? Are you a coward? She kind of questions show her shock and anger here. She accuses him of being weak. Then she insults his masculinity in this speech. When you do it, then you are a man. Be so much more than man. This idea of insulting his masculinity, and this idea of she is more of a man than he will ever be, because she can switch off her feelings towards Duncan. And then again, chief manipulator. If this didn't work, this kind of moment, I've given suck and know how tender it is to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out. This absolutely horrific image of Lady Macbeth murdering her child. I have given suck. Basically, she nursed a child. Obviously, we know that their child died, and she knows that sense of, she felt that love once for a child, but she would rather dash its brain out, that aggressive verbs, pluck and dash, plosive P and D sounds, and the iambic pentameter, the meter of this line, puts the stresses on these words, showing the sheer aggression coming out of Lady Macbeth. And also this horrific image shows the evil she's willing to do compared to him. She would rather kill an unborn child, kill a young baby, an innocent baby, to put her in the position to be able to kill Duncan compared to Macbeth. And this is, really subverting that view of the woman as a kind of a caring mother here. She wants to kill her child. She doesn't want to feed it kind of poison, the milk for gall, but she wants to physically dash its brains. And that is a troubling and horrific image, really, that Shakespeare uses to show anger and also the extent to which he's willing to manipulate her husband. He questions her failure, and she says, we fail. She hasn't entertained the idea of failure here as well. And this seems to work on Macbeth. She tells them the plan. She's going to get the guards drunk. Macbeth's going to get past them and kill Duncan, and then they'll blame the guards. And then this idea that Macbeth says, recognises her inability to be moved. She's got undaunted mettle. She's not going to be moved in the way that he has been in this scene. And from that, she should have nothing but man children. This idea, this question of masculinity there is more of perhaps a man in terms of her, or a stereotypical man in terms of her behaviour in this scene. She's certainly more determined and more resolute than Macbeth is as well. So what I'll get you to do, obviously, before we're going to go on, we've just got one little bit where we're talking about the false face and the false heart. He's got to hide his emotions from Duncan. She's convinced him by insulting him, shocking him, and by just sheer horrific imagery there. So what I'd get you to do is go through each act and scene. So we're on Act 1, so you've done 7 scenes there, and pick out the key quotations from each one, and then start to think about what words you'd analyse in detail, how that links to kind of wider ideas and context, and then obviously in the next video we'll start to look at Act 2 as well.